I'll on this side. So then we just need a little bit further. Right. Camila?
Good. I just started a live stream.
We have a very busy and full room today. I think it's because the Professor Fischl is with us. I think I heard that you were coming back to the classroom. All right. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Finishing class.
Good, good. Yeah, nonstop. Our last speaker, she's going to be joining us very shortly. She just said that she had some issues with transportation, which all of us can understand living in this city, right? And we can get started by speaking a little bit about the video essays. So let's go collect some reactions and just to give some overview on what students were asked to do. We are trying to innovate and change a little bit the way that we assess performance in this course. Traditionally in academia, we tend to focus a lot on writing. And as we know, the world changes, technology changes, and people change. And for the first time, we asked students to produce a video essay, TED Talk style. Right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with making a video. Who was the first? Well, let me get started with this question. For whom this was the first time you create a video for a public audience? Okay, good. All right. I'm surprised that you guys are from the you guys from the YouTube generation. So raise your hand if you think that creating a video essay is harder than writing an op-ed. Okay, more than half of it. Why?
Much harder. Well, it's hard because of the production of the video. Well, I actually had a little bit of a production, but I mean, I don't know.
Okay, good. So time spent on production. What else?
I think it's required two skills because one is writing and the other one is like speaking.
Okay.
So it's one more than just the op-ed.
I agree because op-ed is writing, and when you make a video, you write, but then you need to translate it how you speak, and sometimes you don't sound naturally the way you wrote before.
Yes.
So you'll be like, oh, I wouldn't say that way. You need to do it again and again. That's it's aggravating.
Yeah. Any other reactions?
I think in this case, in a way, it's harder because it's shorter.
Okay, good point.
You have to be more concise and you have to make your point much more quickly, briefly, but still in a compelling way as compared to the op-ed.
Definitely being objective and at the same time engage your audience. Otherwise, like 15 seconds.
Yeah, unless you can deliver 600 words in 3 minutes, it's probably too fast.
Exactly. So for those of you who think that making a video is easier than writing an op-ed, why don't you share some thoughts with us? For those of you who didn't raise your hand.
I don't think it's harder or easier. They're just like different skills, and I think it requires a different part of your brain to do that. It's also you have to have a lot of conviction in what you're saying. It's hard to say something that you don't believe in out loud, right? So I think it's more personal in a way.
Good. Yes.
I know I raised my hand for the harder, but I know it could be like both. I know that with a video essay, it could be more personal, you can put more of your personality in it. Like you can like sort of like I know in an essay or op-ed, it's very formal, even in the sense, even if you put your own voice to it. But with a video, you can really like relax. If you know how to do it, eventually you know how to relax and just relay information, like go step by step with knowing your audience. And if you're well informed, it can be very easy process.
Right. So let me ask you this. When you think about balancing time, creating the content and creating and editing the video, how would you describe the way that you used your time?
I'd say it was maybe 20% creating the content, like writing the op-ed, and 80% with the production, editing, and everything else.
All right.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be the opposite. I spent a lot of time in the OPED and trying to make the arguments okay, and then recording the situation. I didn't edit the notes.
Yes, let me not feel you. I feel op-ed looks still new to me. So it's kind of like I need to pay attention to structural content in that. This content is sort for me than the way they language.
Very good.
I'm not sure about the timing because I was like back and forth. I'll be right, test, not good, and right again. And I'll change the content, not like the core arguments, but the way I was expressing by like experimenting.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I think I didn't manage well my time because I spent a lot of time like writing my script, what I was going to say, and I was like, okay, I'm confident. But when I was recording, I was like, no, it's gonna be 5 minutes. And it has to be like 3 minutes now. What is essential? What I have to remove? And then of course, like the production, yeah, that's it. It was challenging. And my camera, like it reflected in my glasses. So if you wear glasses, be careful because I only realized after submitting.
Yeah, that's a good lesson, right? So devils in on details, and also a lot of things that you only learn by doing it. Something that I mentioned in the beginning. When you don't have time to write or do something that's small, like in this case, that's a short video, then you do a long one, right? So it's much harder to come up with something that is straightforward. Why don't we take advantage of specialists here? Google. If you had to produce a 3-minute video, TED Talk style, to provide a very focused recommendation, any suggestions to our students?
No, I usually don't write what I say. I just improvise whenever I have to say anything. But usually, like if you don't remember something, the other person won't remember what you were saying. So usually I try to like remember the things that I will say. And that's it. There is no other way. And have in my mind like that, because usually I have they give me, you have 2 minutes to speak about something. I know by head like what's 2 minutes. So and I just ask them when there's 10 seconds left, just let me know, and then I can conclude my thinking. So this is the way I do. But the other people, they like to write, most of the people, and reading the teleprompter. I don't like because I think it's more artificial, but that's it.
Yeah, I guess if you're a professional, right, and you're used to the way that you can deliver the message by.
I always think that you're talking to a friend. That's always good as well, in my view.
Oh, awesome. While we wait for our last speaker who's on the way, I just want to share a couple of thoughts about a recent trip that I did to Brazil. Actually, I just arrived. My backpack from the other week. And if I say something that it doesn't feel very reasonable, I can blame it on the trip. I'm not like Professor Fischl who flies on business class all the time, overnight, red eye. But the first thing is that even though this trip was short, every time I go to Brazil, I get this perception that first it's an amazing country, right? In every sense. I think when we see things from that distance, and then you get there, and every time you go there, you see something how things change so quickly. It is. I think it's one of the reasons why foreigners who go to Brazil, they get so excited about the country. Another thing that I realized that Brazilians are very hard on themselves. And every time you talk to people, they tend always to bring the things that they are more concerned about rather than seeing the glass half full. Something that maybe you can discuss as part of our conversation here, right? Why is it that? Is it based on a snapshot of the current situation, or it is something that goes deeper into that's part of our psyche or culture? The second thing is that the country itself is going through this phase of change. I think that, and you can almost feel that people perceive the current status or the current situation in the country in a way that they don't know what's going to happen next, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around. I think there was optimism about the new administration. At the same time, as we're going to be talking about, there's a certain gap between expectations and reality, okay? And which leads to this perception of uncertainty, and in many ways it affects people planning about what they want to do in the next in the near future. And the third one is that more personal that I would like to share because it's related to our panel here. I went to Brazil to get an award. And the award was given. That was given by my alma mater, the University of São Paulo. Some of you have studied there. I know at least one of you studied there. It was an award for alumni that have produced an impact in different areas of society. In my case, was innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm mentioning this because not because what I did, but because how I got there. And to a great extent, it is because of the conversations and the mentorship of someone who's here today. So Professor Fischlo, he was a professor of Google, myself, and he created the Center for Brazilian Studies at the time, very well-known Brazilianist, emeritus professor here and at Berkeley. And if you think that I'm harsh on my comments, I wish you had taken professorship. But being honest and straightforward has helped all of us to improve and to progress. Right? So I'm very thankful to Professor Fischlo. And I thought a lot about this as I was going to Brazil for this ceremony, and then when I was coming back. So Professor Fischlo, it's so timely to have you back in the classroom. Thanks so much. Our second speaker here is Guga Chakra. So all Brazilians know Guga. Guga is a celebrity. And one of the reasons why this room is so full or have more people than usual, it is because I guess some Guga has some fans that found out that he was coming to the classroom. And we are very happy to have Guga back in our class. His second most important credential, it is to be a correspondent and commentator at Global TV. His most important credential is to be an alum of Columbia and a former CIPA student. And it's very nice to have Guga back with us. It's very hard to get him here at Columbia. Some of you probably tried to find him. All right, this is something that we can talk about. So Guga is an extraordinary swimmer, and you guys might have seen this new movie, Naiad, on Netflix. So if you want to understand the challenges of being a marathon swimmer, you can ask Guga, who knows all about the topic. Yeah, our third speaker, and it's good that we can talk about her while she is on her way to the room. She also has spoken here in the past, and when you think about Wall Street and people who understand the country and the economy very well, we can always think about a handful of people. And we're very lucky to have Samar Mazyad.
Wow,
Perfect timing. Thanks, Samar. Because we're just introducing the speakers here.
Okay.
And
The wrong exits.
no, we're saving the best for last. And Samar is a vice president and senior analyst at Moody's Sovereign Risk Group. She's the lead credit analyst for a portfolio of Latin American sovereigns, in particular Brazil. Previously, she was a senior economist at the IMF, where, by the way, coincidentally, she worked with our president, Minouche.
Oh, right. President. Okay, yes.
And maybe when we turn off the camera and we start the discussion, there might be some good stories.
You'll ask me questions?
Right. So, Samar spoke here in the past, and she has been always one of the most popular speakers in our class, and we always bring back due to popular acclaim.
Thank you.
For those, some speakers that can benefit, different generations that can benefit from our popular speakers. So the topic for today is exciting for many of us, right? And especially for those of us who have been following Brazil very closely and looking to Brazil's history, because is Brazil back is a question that was in everyone's back of mind when the new administration started. And there were several articles produced with that particular topic, addressing that particular topic. You can think of that from different perspectives, of economic recovery, political change, different approaches to diplomacy and foreign policy. By the way, last week we had the Consul General of Brazil as a speaker, so our students are well acquainted with Brazilian foreign policy, and today's discussion is going to build up on what we talked about last week. So that's why we put together this stellar panel with specialists that will be addressing each one of those different angles. Okay? So Samar, why don't we get started with the economics, right? Because in the end of the day, as we hear it in the space sector, no Buck Rogers, meaning that if you don't have the resources, like things cannot happen. So, and I think that's probably, I would almost argue that on the bright side, things have been surprisingly well. So how can we explain this change of perception, and what can we expect in short term?
Okay, thank you very much, Sydney, and thank you for inviting me back. It's always fun. Yeah, I look forward to the discussion and the questions, and it's always good to see Professor Fischler as well. Well, it's interesting. I looked at the titles of the articles you shared are quite telling. Brazil is back and all of that, and I think part of it is the contrast with the previous administration in terms of public opinion and perception and presentation and you mentioned foreign policy. So there is an element of that. And I think there's also, a sense of relief given how polarized the elections were. I think it was only last year in November where there was a lot of concern and worry about that. So that in a way sets the stage for the reaction maybe you are describing. But on concretely or on the economic front, I think there's also been positive surprises on the growth. It's not only this year. So growth last year was also around 3%, and that was not what everyone was expecting either. So you have now 2 years of, for Brazil's recent standards, very strong growth of 3%. So I think that's driving a lot of sentiment or positive sentiment as well. But I think saying, Brazil is back, I don't know, you can look at many on the international stage, yes, for sure. But the narrow interest on the economic side is I would say, are they back or are they, getting there? Maybe getting there is better, and it depends where there is. So growth at this rate is a big improvement from pre-pandemic performance, and if you look at the averages, it's a big improvement, right? From before the pandemic, and that's related to the Lava Jato crisis, and that was a very deep crisis. So that I think supports that. But is it sustainable at this level, and where do we go from here? So, for example, for next year, our improved growth forecast is of 2%, and that is considered on the optimistic side because people are still, or most houses are forecasting around 1.5%, and I think the fund as well. But I think we kind of suggest that maybe part of the higher growth that we saw in the last 2 years is not only a rebound, there's not only agriculture, you can many cyclical factors, agriculture, lag effect of monetary policy easing before it's, from until 2021. And there are a number of cyclical elements to it. But perhaps, and that's, I guess, what is suggested in the slightly higher growth is some impact of the structural reforms that have been going on. So I think you're looking at, since the introduction of the spending ceiling in 2016, between 2016 and today, or 2023, call it 2022, you have maybe, what is that, the right math? 8 years of a number of measures that are, as we call it, not credit positive, but like supportive of an economic reform agenda. So starting with the spending ceiling, there was a pension reform or social security reform, labor reform, sanitation reform, the whole host of things, and efforts on to improve the business environment or ease of doing business that are, maybe they don't grab as much headline, but now we're looking at the tax reform, which is more in the future. Will take a long time to implement, but I think some of these reforms may be also paying dividends in terms of growth. Is that enough? No, even 2% is not enough. And enough by many, enough can be, by many definitions, at least from a debt dynamics perspective, you need a bit higher growth or more fiscal adjustment to improve standards of living, income, in per capita, and all of this. No, there has to be, or there should be higher real growth rates. But considering where we were and it's a bit high. But my point is, we don't see 3% on a sustainable basis just from now on. Probably more reforms have to be implemented before you get there. So that's on the economic side or the macro side. You can talk about inflation and interest rates in a bit if you want, but the other point is on the fiscal side, and that's a lot of discussion about the new fiscal framework, and this is something we care about a lot. And this, with all its shortcomings, if you will, the spending ceiling did last for 6 years, and did help contain spending and achieve improvement in fiscal performance. Again, not enough. So you're still looking at a primary deficit and an overall deficit of 7%, 8%. So it's high. So now the new fiscal framework created its own set of questions as how, if you will, the government will be able to resume or achieve or improve on fiscal consolidation. And again, we can talk about that more if you want. But the point is, on the economic front, there's still an agenda there to work on.
Absolutely, and we'll explore specificities of each one of those items in the agenda during the discussion. So, Guga, we mentioned this idea that there's a gap between expectations and reality. And maybe unrealistically, Lula has started his third administration with a lot of hope from not only from those who elected him, but also from those who have been following Brazil. And the big question was like, what Lula would be in power, and you can think about this both from the domestic policy perspective, but also from the international arena, right? So do you see consistency between what we see Lula both in when you think about domestic policy and when we think about his diplomatic stance?
So let's start for his foreign policy. There was a lot of expectation regarding Lula because he became president after Bolsonaro, as you said. So you had a far-right president, and after him, Lula. And it's different from 2002 because then he replaced Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was a center-left president. In economy, he was more center-right, but as a general, he was a center-left or centrist president, respected outside Brazil. And Lula was not well known outside Brazil, was known as a labor leader, as a politician, but not as he is now after Bolsonaro, because people knew him from the previous 8 years that he was president of Brazil and everything that happened afterwards. So it was a lot of expectation with Lula, and especially regarding the environment. He could become a global leader for environment. People were looking at him, even when he went to Egypt, were like to the COP, before he became president after the election. He already won when he ran there. So there was this expectation with him. But after he became president, he became more erratic. So he saw the world as it was when he was president. The BRICS as it was when he was president. When Putin was fine with the international community, there was no big deal. When Xi Jinping was not in power in China, I think it was Hu Jintao or Yang Zemin, I'm not sure. Hu Jintao was in power in China, he's different from Xi Jinping. So, and China was not as strong, it was becoming strong, but was not as strong as it is now. China didn't have a nationalist as the prime minister, as Modi, was more normal, like I think it was Singh that was in power, like there were different ones when Lula was president. So it was a different world. The US was in the war in Iraq, everything, and there was the crisis of 2008, and Brazil did a little bit well afterwards. Now he became president, there was the war in Ukraine. And he could have the position of the other presidents of Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. What's the position? You condemn the Russian invasion, but you don't apply sanctions to Russia, and you don't give weapons to Ukraine. You just say, no, it's wrong to invade another country, and you vote like that in the General Assembly or whatever you are. But Lula started to say things by himself. It was not like things that the foreign minister wanted him to say. And his image in the Western world was a bit, not much, but like burned when he said that the West was as responsible for the war as Russia. He avoids, he has this Trump thing that I don't know what happens, and Bolsonaro as well. They are afraid of criticizing Putin. There is something that is there. Okay, he can't criticize Putin, but like his instance in Ukraine was really bad for his image. And he didn't become like this leader that the world was expecting him. And the relation with the United States that Biden bet a lot on Lula because of the Democrats and what happened in Brazil with the invasion of the Congress, of the Palácio Planalto, and they related with the invasion of the capital here in the United States. So, but afterwards, the relationship between them was not that great. His trip to China was much more important, and he himself considered his trip to China much more important than his trip to the United States. So that says a lot. For him, the BRICS is the most important thing, like in foreign policy. And now the BRICS has also Iran, has Saudi Arabia, has Egypt, has other countries, the Emirates, so and even Argentina. So he sees the world like as like he sees himself as part of what people say that is the global South, and he sees himself as a leader, and so he doesn't see himself as part of the West, because Brazil is not part of the West when we think about that. The West doesn't see Brazil as part of the West, but he went to the other side a little bit more than people were expecting him. And just finishing for the questions up, I think we should pay attention in Argentina. We have an election in Argentina. This not in 2 weeks and 10 days actually. And one of the candidates, Milei, who is a libertarian, he said that he's not going to deal with Lula. He's not going to talk or meet Lula. He's crazy, Milei. Milei is very different from even Bolsonaro and Trump. But Bolsonaro and Trump, they were far-right leaders right-wing leaders. Milei is a libertarian, but he's crazy. But he's crazy on another level. He's not normal at all. And he might win. We don't know. He might win. And Lula never had this experience in Argentina, because when he was president was Duhalde, then Nestor Kirchner, then Cristina. So they were all Peronists. Now was Fernandez. So he didn't have to deal with, and even if it was Macri, he would do well with Macri. If Boric won the election, Larreta was the mayor of Buenos Aires, he would have a good or even great relationship with that. He had with Bush. We can't forget about that. Lula had a good relationship with Bush, who was the president of the United States. He liked Bush, even more than he likes Biden, by the way. But if Milei wins, it will be hard for Mercosur. Because one thing is, if you have a center-right like Lakachepo, he has a good relation with Lula. Milei is another level, so we should pay attention to that, because that will have an impact on Brazil, and also what will happen in Argentina with Milei. We can talk more about that later.
Yeah, and just briefly on the domestic side, right? So do you see some consistency in same?
On the domestic side, just to be fast, because official has to speak. No, I don't see, especially regarding the minorities, when when you look to the Supreme Courts in Brazil with the STF, where he's going to nominate another white man instead of nominating a woman or a black woman, as people were expecting before.
Yeah, pretty good. That's a good start for the conversation. So, Professor Fischl, about 10 years ago, you wrote a book, Starting Over. So it looks like Brazil's always starting over. How would you describe the current situation from this historical perspective?
You know, these are sort of like the way in which Brazil is viewed in part by the rest of the world. And it's always been seen as the country of the future rather than of the past. And it was always that there would be a moment of rationality that would occur. And from that time onward, Brazil would advance into the future. That never happened. And one wonders why it didn't happen. I would say that part of the story goes back to coffee and to the start of the export of coffee, which had variability in its price, and in which Brazil was involved in the effort to control coffee and make coffee available from what was stored away. So it goes back a very long time. Now, when Lula won the last time, he was able to benefit from a world in which prices of commodities were rising. This was a wonderful world to be in. And it was a world in which Brazil had an inflow of resources and investments were made in Brazil in order to construct a manufacturing sector. That this was always behind the scenes what was necessary, so that the construction of a manufacturing sector was at the heart of the new Brazil. And when I wrote the book, in part, it was just after an election in which Lula was succeeded by his earlier woman who was serving in part because there was a difficulty at that time. Brazil, as I remember, because I first went to Brazil in the early 1960s, and it was the case that you had that happen, so that it was all domestically oriented. And then you had the discovery of oil. This was the great treasure that was going to be the basis of future development in Brazil. And it was petroleum, and the price of petroleum rising rapidly because of the war between Iraq and Iran, that this was occurring. And in that world, you could suddenly do virtually anything. And you had the resources to do it. And Brazil became the place where suddenly you were going to be the country that had the Olympics and the country that also had the World Cup. Both of them were there, and a central feature of the growth of Brazil at the time. Now, I wrote the book basically before Dilma became president, and she became president because of the promises that were made. She was going to double income per capita over a period of 10 years. So you had all of this going on in the past, where Lula's popularity was enormous. When he left the presidency, his popularity was of the order of 85%. And Lula, therefore, was a great man. And he suddenly was also important internationally because of the petroleum. And he was able to focus on state-oriented growth. This was growth from the top. It was from the top down. And he seemed to believe that he was going to be someone of great importance. That didn't happen. It didn't happen because suddenly commodity prices went down, because suddenly the attempt to build new airports and the like got caught up in all of the visits during the period and the problems that mounted at that time. And he found himself suddenly caught up in scandals. And as a result of those scandals, you had the problems that arose, and Lula was eventually committed to prison. And that was how Bolsonaro managed to rise up and ultimately become president and had the sickest regime possible. The change came when Lula was set free, and when you had the whole problem of dealing with the world when he was ultimately freed from the limitations that he had previously had.
Professor Fischel.
I will stop at this point with one basic observation. Brazil imagines. Brazil imagines what will happen as a result of actions that it takes. And almost inevitably, those actions come into conflict with what was going on earlier.
Professor Fischel, that's fantastic because you provide a great overview of our recent past, and because some in our audience are not very familiar with Brazil, so we're gonna just provide some context. Professor Fischel mentioned Dilma Rousseff, who succeeded Lula after his second term. And by the way, so last week we had Marcos Perico, former president of the New Development Bank. Guess what? Who succeeded him? And then NDB, Dilma Rousseff. Right? So maybe that's in line with what Guga said about how Lula is prioritizing the BRICS countries, and he appointed someone who was very high profile, right? A former head of state. Professor Fischel mentioned corruption scandals, and we should always make reference to car wash, right? Big topic until recently, and it looks like it hasn't been on the news right now, but it's something that we can discuss as part of our panel here. But one thing that seems to be a common theme across the board when here from Guga, from Professor Fischel, and from Samar, is the fact that most of the challenge that we face in Brazil seems to be self-inflicted, right? We cannot. In the past, we could blame imperialism, or we could blame oil prices. There was something to blame, and that's not the case anymore. So this is an open question for everyone, since this can be a challenge, but also an opportunity. How can we start moving the needle in a way that things can improve through our own efforts?
And maybe I'll start because since I started following Brazil, I always thought so. It's a continental economy. Okay, so people always ask about commodity prices and China and for Brazil, this is important, but I wouldn't go as far. I would be a little exaggerating, a little say on the margin. In the last 10 years, it's important for exporters. It's important for certain sectors. But as other people will point out, also is that okay, Brazil is a commodity exporter in the sense they export grains, they export soya, they export meat. It will be exported at whatever the price is. It's not the issue of quantity. You're not manufacturing products that you have to compete with others. This is demand. So it could happen that prices fall, or you have a bad year, or and limited supply, so prices rise. I mean, prices fluctuate, but it doesn't affect growth because you produce, it's agriculture, it's been created, it will be exported. It's a question of price. So talking about growth drivers and external demand and all of these things are not material in the case of Brazil. It was important during the Lava Jato, which you mentioned in 2015-16, because there was zero domestic demand, right? That's why you had two years of 3% contraction year on year, for 2 years in a row. And when growth came back, it was like 0, 1%. It's a kind of a loss decay. So that tells you that it's a lot domestic. So growth, it's like the US, it's a continental economy. So we look at domestic demand, meaning consumption, investment, and a lot of that is government-led typically. So how do we move forward is that you need to do more private-led investment or private sector investment. Brazil doesn't get a lot of FDI either relative to its size because it's big, but this year FDI is picking up. And if you say so it's really domestically driven for when it comes to economic factor. Politics is, it's always domestic, right? But I think what you're asking, my view is that there is a lot of opportunity now from a global scale, from a global demand for agricultural products, for food security, for energy transition. And this is something we can talk about. And of course, this current administration is kind of seizing the moment, at least in terms of the rhetoric, and presenting a big investment plan that a big part of it is around energy transition and also social aspects. So ESG is something that this government is trying to capitalize on. So where does that? I mean, I say it's their game to lose in a way. So they will not be the first time to miss an opportunity, but the opportunity is there. And I don't think it's only Brazil. It's a lot of countries in Latin America, at least in the south, have the element to benefit in terms of clean energy and agriculture supply to the world, right? This is one of the only areas that actually produce excess supply of food.
Absolutely. Yeah, something that we mentioned last week, right?
Yeah.
Brazil is the country where we don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
You can just remain hopeful, right? But I think the opportunity is there. So not this year, not next year, but if you look at strategically, the external environment in a broad definition should enable enable Brazil to take advantage of that.
Yeah, so along those lines, like if I hear Samar, what she's saying is that there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, right? And Brazil can explore some of, and Samar mentioned the food security and the transition social, any other low-hanging fruits for Brazil to take advantage of.
Fiscal reforms.
Is it a low?
It's not that difficult.
I think that in terms of the future, Lula has benefited enormously from having Haddad serve as finance minister, who has really tried to save the day and has in fact tried to make future policy work. I think that the problems that Brazil have had has been precisely focus on agriculture rather than on the manufacturing sector. That the manufacturing sector has not been the source of productivity gain over the last 25 years. And at the heart of what's going on now is that this is not what Lula has accepted. He's willing to have a deficit, and he's willing to have a deficit which will be much larger than is currently envisioned, simply because he thinks 3.5% growth is something that he and only he can accomplish.
Professor, that's a great point, right? And then it doesn't look like we're just grabbing low-hanging fruit. It's like the shooting itself on the food, right? Because and Samar was alluding to this, like fiscal reforms is one of the key issues for the country right now.
Yes, yes. I mean, and that's why I talk about the spending ceiling and the new framework, and it's I mean, not that the spending ceiling was a perfect rule, but it was the only rule. So it forced a lot of other conversations around it imposed this a budget constraint, literally, and then you have to adjust. And then that brought about other reforms on the spending side because of the indexation and mandatory spending and all of that. So now when the spending ceiling is now gone, then the other, if you will, accompanying measures that were put in place and were necessary to comply with the ceiling have also been reversed, such as the mandatory increase in health and education spending, and a lot of indexation and increasing the minimum wage. And those were precisely the problems that you kind of would like to see addressed to fix in a sustainable way the pressure on the spending side. So that the new rule, in a way, abstracts from that problem and focuses on the revenue side, which is really not the problem for Brazil, because revenue are already relatively high by emerging market standards and all of that.
Very good. And I just want to mention something that Professor Fischel, I think, pointed pretty well. Agriculture, right? When you think about the shining stars in Brazil, the agricultural sector is it's a great example of a sector that managed to take advantage of the opportunities and seize the opportunities. Very dynamic. It has been responsible for primary surplus of the country. Very fast adoption technology, very competitive on a global scale. Right? So, Google, do you subscribe to the view that we can see things from the half full glass perspective, or you are more skeptical of the current situation right now?
I think like Brazil has some strengths. For example, when you compare the way that Brazil dealt with the threats to democracy, when you compare to the United States, Brazil did a much better job than the United States did. First thing. Second thing, there is more consensus in Brazilian politics than there is in the United States. When one party is totally against the other party, in Brazil you can manage. You saw when the governor of São Paulo, Tarcísio, who is a right-wing governor, he was side by side with Haddad, talking about the need of reforms. So that's good. You don't see that in the United States. You see there, Bolsonaro is out of the field. Like now you have another he can come back, it will be difficult for him to come back. It's different from Donald Trump, who might be the next American president. So there is this consensus with when you talk about reforms, you see most of the parts in the center left, the center right, the right, you see the center, you can manage things better in Brazil sometimes. You can advance that, like you like. And the second thing, the Brazilian economy is not great at all. But since '94, it's like the inflation is relatively stable. You had times that were worse and times that were better. But when you compare to Argentina, okay, but like Argentina is our neighbor and was like they are better educated than Brazil. They had social numbers that are much better than the Brazilian numbers, still better than Brazil. They don't have as much as criminality as Brazil, but still, like when you look to Argentina, Brazil is doing a better job or less worse. So like that are the strengths of Brazil. Besides that, I think Brazil keep going like mediocre, like it's this mediocrity. I had classes with Professor Fischler here from 2005, history of Brazilian economics in the other room, and he said Brazil is going to keep growing like 1%, 2%, 3%, and that's it. And it's the same thing.
Well, 3 would be great.
Yeah. No, he said that the 3 would be great. And like we had the times of the commodities that was a little better than the recession, but in general, that's Brazil. It's never going to be, I don't know, never, but in the near future, it's going to be like this. It's Brazil. It's not as decadent as Argentina, but it's this mediocre country. Like
And so it looks like Guga is very optimistic.
Argentina, you will be optimistic. Okay, I mean, it makes anybody other than Venezuela look better. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree, right? There's a word that perfectly describes the situation, Schadenfreude, right? You feel better when others right? But I think that Guga, you point out to some very good points, right? Brazil has a very strong, very solid institutions, right? And the way that dealt with democracy was a very good example, right? The way that is, as you mentioned, convergence of what Brazil had to do, right? Definitely, there's much less polarization, at least on that regard. We're gonna stop transmission right now, and we can start